Two giant Boeing 747s. One single runway. A thick blanket of fog, and in less than a minute, the deadliest accident in aviation history would unfold. It happened so fast, no one had time to scream. One plane was taking off. The other was taxiing straight toward it. In the haze of confusion, miscommunication, and tragic timing, 583 people lost their lives in a flash of fire and metal. But how could two massive aircraft, guided by trained professionals, end up on a deadly collision course? What was the air traffic controller doing? And what single misunderstood phrase sealed the fate of nearly 600 souls? This isn't just a story about planes. It's a story about pressure, human error, and what happens when systems fail in the worst way possible. It's about a chain reaction where one small delay, one wrong turn, one misheard word led to catastrophe. And it happened in a place no one expected. A tiny island in Spain, on a runway that wasn't supposed to be busy at all. This is the chilling true story of the Tenerife Airport Disaster, a moment that changed aviation forever. March 26, 1977, two jumbo jets begin their journeys from opposite sides of the Atlantic, both unknowingly heading toward disaster. First, Pan Am Flight 1736, a Boeing 747 operated by Pan American World Airways. It departs from Los Angeles and stops briefly at New York JFK Airport to pick up additional passengers, most of them older tourists, excited to escape to the warm beaches of the Canary Islands for a dream cruise. The crew is experienced and highly capable. At the helm, Captain Victor Grubbs, a respected pilot with over 21,000 flying hours. He's joined by First Officer Robert Bragg and Flight Engineer George Warnes. Altogether, there are 380 passengers and 16 crew members on board. Their final destination, Las Palmas, the capital of the Canary Islands. Meanwhile, KLM Flight 4805 is preparing for takeoff in Amsterdam. Another Boeing 747, operated by the Dutch airline KLM, known for its excellence and safety record. On board 235 passengers and 14 crew. In command, Captain Jacob Veldezen, Van Zantona, named synonymous with KLM itself. He's their most experienced instructor and the public face of the airline and adds. Alongside him, First Officer Klaas Meurs and Flight Engineer Willem Schwartz. KLM Flight 4805 is also headed to Las Palmas, carrying Dutch tourists set for vacation, but neither flight knows that fate has other plans. A terrorist attack, a diverted flight, and a crowded airport with limited space will place both aircraft at Tenerife Northern Airport they were never meant to use. There, beneath a sudden shroud of fog, these two jets will cross paths on a single strip of tarmac that becomes a runway to disaster. As both flights cruise toward the Canary Islands, events on the ground would begin a chain reaction no one could foresee. At 1 p.m. local time, a phone call was received at Las Palmas Airport. The caller, claiming to represent a separatist group called the MPAIAC, warned that a bomb had been placed in the terminal and would detonate in just 15 minutes. The staff didn't wait. Passengers and crew were evacuated immediately, and then boom, a suitcase left outside a flower shop exploded. The terminal's roof partially collapsed, but miraculously, no lives were lost. Still, the threat was real and the danger far from over. Las Palmas Airport was shut down. All incoming flights were diverted. The largest nearby airstrip, Tenerife North, a much smaller airport never meant to handle jumbo jets, let alone several all at once. By 1:38 p.m., KLM Flight 4805 landed at Tenerife. The captain, unsure how long they'd be delayed, ordered a full refuel on the spot just in case. Not long after, Pan Am 1736 was also rerouted to the small apron quickly filled with planes, clogging taxiways and complicating movement. Tenerife North wasn't built for this kind of traffic. It had one runway, one taxiway, and no ground radar. Pilots had to navigate by sight and radio, and the sky was beginning to change. What should have been a brief delay was becoming a logistical nightmare. By the time Las Palmas finally reopened, the dominoes were already falling. Because of KLM's refueling, Pan Am's aircraft was stuck, unable to taxi forward. And when it finally was time for both flights to move, the plan was improvised. Use the only runway. In a moment of pressure and protocol breaking, both planes began rolling, one behind the other, in opposite directions. And then, the fog descended. Tenerife North Airport was surrounded by hills and close to the Atlantic Ocean. Here weather changed fast, and now, a thick, cold fog had swallowed the runway. Visibility dropped from 2 kilometers to just 300 meters in seconds. One moment, the runway was clear. The next, it was like flying blind. KLM Flight 4805 had finished refueling. At 4:45 p.m., the captain received instructions to taxi down the runway itself, turn around at the end, and prepare for takeoff. Meanwhile, Pan Am 1736 was cleared to follow KLM down the same runway, then exit using the third taxiway on the left, called C3. The idea was simple. Pan Am would turn off before KLM began its takeoff roll, but the fog was so dense that the Pan Am crew missed the exit. C1 and C2 were visible, but C3 required a sharp turn back toward the terminal. The signage was poor, the layout unfamiliar, and time was running out. Pan Am's jumbo jet kept rolling, still on the runway and seen by KLM and the control tower. There was no ground radar, no visual confirmation of position, just voices over the radio, trying to piece it together in real time. KLM reached the end of the runway and turned 180 degrees to face forward. Then the confusion escalated. The KLM captain, hearing routing instructions from the tower, mistook them for takeoff clearance. He pushed the thrust levers forward. The engines roared to life, and in the fog, that 747 began to accelerate. At the exact same time, Pan Am's crew radioed, "We're still on the runway." But the two messages overlapped. The radio KLM never heard it. They were both on the same stretch of tarmac, one taxiing, one taking off, and they couldn't see each other. The KLM aircraft thundered down the foggy runway, gaining speed. Pan Am 1736 was still taxiing, unaware that a 747 was racing toward them through the mist. Inside the Pan Am cockpit, First Officer Robert Bragg squinted into the haze. At first, they thought KLM was holding position, but within seconds, their horror grew. The aircraft was moving in fast. "Get off! Get off!" the Pan Am captain shouted. Bragg slammed the throttles forward. The massive jet turned hard left, trying to exit the runway, but it was too late. KLM Flight 4805 was now at takeoff speed, 160 knots too fast to stop. In the KLM cockpit, the flight engineer made a desperate call. "Is he not clear then, that Pan Am?" The captain responded. "Oh yes." But he was wrong. At 5:06 p.m., the nose of KLM's plane lifted off the ground. The captain attempted a premature takeoff, trying to leap over the Pan Am aircraft. The landing gear missed, but the engines didn't. KLM's undercarriage struck the upper fuselage of Pan Am, slicing through the first-class cabin. Fuel tanks burst. Fire exploded across the runway. The KLM jet soared briefly, then crashed back to the ground, erupting in flames. The wreckage skidded down the runway, trailing fire and debris. The Pan Am aircraft, torn open, caught fire almost instantly. Passengers screamed in confusion, smoke choking the cabin. Many died on impact. Others, disoriented and terrified, scrambled toward openings in the fuselage, jumping 20 feet to the ground to escape the flames. Out of 396 people on board Pan Am, only 61 survived. Every single person on KLM Flight 4805-248 lives was lost. The deadliest aviation disaster in history had just occurred, and the control tower didn't even know it yet. It was chaos. From the control tower, no one could see the crash. The fog was so thick, they didn't realize what had happened until flames lit up the sky. A pilot from another plane saw the fireball and radioed in. "There's been an accident. There's a huge fire on the runway." Only then did emergency responders leap into action. But time was already lost, and fog slowed everything. Fire trucks struggled to locate the wreckage. Precious minutes slipped away. On the Pan Am flight, survivors pushed through debris and darkness. Smoke filled the cabin. The smell of burning fuel was everywhere. With no instruction, no light, and no path, people had to make split-second decisions. Some climbed over seats, others kicked open panels in the ceiling. One stewardess used a flashlight to guide passengers to an opening. It wasn't a proper exit, it was a hole torn by impact. Still, they jumped 20 feet to the tarmac below. Some broke bones. Some were burned, but they lived. Rescue crews finally reached the scene, but it was too late for most. Bodies were everywhere, charred, beyond recognition. On KLM's side, there were no survivors. The fire had consumed the entire aircraft. The runway had become a war zone of melted metal, fire, and silence. In a matter of seconds, 583 people were gone. The crash at Tenerife wasn't just tragic. It was historic, ranking as the worst aviation disaster not caused by terrorism or a deliberate act. And now, investigators had to find out, how could this happen? In the weeks that followed, investigators from Spain, the US, and the Netherlands pored over cockpit recorders, flight data, and tower logs. The verdict: a tragic chain of errors, miscommunication, fatigue, poor visibility, no ground radar, and a fatal misunderstanding by the KLM captain. He thought they had takeoff clearance. Just 5 seconds before liftoff, the KLM flight engineer raised the concern. Had the captain paused, the disaster may have been avoided. The crash at Tenerife forced change in aviation forever. New global standards were introduced: clearer radio language, team-based cockpit training, mandatory ground radar at busy airports. Today, Tenerife has 2 airports, one relocated to lower ground, away from dense fog. 583 lives were lost, but their sacrifice reshaped the skies we all fly in.